kind of first principles approach to beekeeping and
putting up with this experiment. You all are guinea pigs on something I think is pretty exciting if we can pull it off. A little commercial for the Midwest Beekeepers Association Facebook group. There's also the Missouri State Beekeepers Association Facebook group, and there is also one called the Missouri Beekeepers Group. I suggest if you are a Facebooker that you sign up for those. There are great conversations there, questions, lots of examples. And on the Midwestern Beekeepers Association group, you'll notice, can you guys see my pointer moving?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so down here you see mentorship. Next to discussion, you can sign up to either be a mentor or a mentee. And that is when you guys make connections with, if you ask someone to be your mentor, you'll have a private conversation about what you want or what you'd like to ask the mentor. And you guys can figure out whether you're going to have visits or just conversation or a coffee clutch or whatever. But that's always available to you guys if you have a problem. But you can also go online to these groups and ask the questions to the whole beekeeping group in Missouri. So it's pretty nice. So we're going to talk, I'm going to have to talk really fast to get through some of this stuff. Hive inspections, it is the way that humans figure out what bees are going to do and figure out what bees were doing yesterday and what they're doing right now. Sherlock Holmes was a beekeeper. In the Scarlet Letter, he's lecturing to Dr. Watson, and he says there's nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. And there are obvious facts all over beehives. And you think you know what's going on, but you see it, but you do not observe it. And it's the little things that are important when you're trying to figure out what's going on. So you want to be able to observe what's going on, not just see it. What we're going to cover, we're going to talk about the building blocks. I'm a big believer in knowing biology and behavior. And if you know those two things, you can decipher everything there is about bees. And your success or failure is going to really depend on how well you understand the biology and the behavior of bees. We're also going to talk a little bit about seasons, not very much, but understand that weather and the seasons depend or determine the priorities that you might be looking at when you do your inspections. Seasons are also the most understandable for humans, because humans love to divide time up into weeks and hours and months and years and seasons. And so we're going to talk about the bees seasons and its month and how time is measured for a bee. We get into inspections, we're going to talk about your plans, both for the season, for the year, and the purpose of your inspection. Why are you getting into the hive? We're going to talk about the types of inspections, not so much that it's important to name what kind of inspection you're doing, but it will help us to discuss the techniques involved in each one of those. And then we're going to talk, and then these last three are kind of all together. They're the art and science of beekeeping, where you take these building blocks and you go into the hive and you do your inspection, you learn to read what the bees are doing, you learn to read the frames. And the bees tell you what's happening in the moment, and the frames tell you, the frames are like a little history book of what has happened in the last 21 days and what's going to happen in the next 21 days. And if you understand how to read that, you're going to be a better beekeeper. So the building blocks, more specifically about bee biology, we're going to talk about the brood cycle. It is the clock, it is the calendar that controls the bee world. Related to that is the life cycle of the worker bee, how long it lives, and how long it functions in the different sections of the life cycle. We're not going to talk a whole lot about nutrition, but you're going to be monitoring the intake and the use of both carbohydrates, nectar, honey, syrup, and protein, mainly pollen, or if you use substitutes. And then we'll talk a little bit about health. Mostly, we're not really going to look at sickness or evidence of disease. I'm going to key on what is healthy, and then if you see something that doesn't look healthy, then you're going to investigate that, and it'll make your first year so much more enjoyable if you don't sit around worrying about American foul brood, European foul brood, all the other broods, sac brood, chalk brood, yada, yada, yada. You will want to monitor your mites, and your mites are a vector for other diseases, that viruses that you really can't see until maybe it's too late. So you want to control that mite population. Bee behavior is totally instinctual. It is reactive. It is never proactive. They do not know that it's going to rain tomorrow or be sunshiny like it is today. They don't know that it was 30 degrees 2 days ago and it's 60 degrees today. They respond to external stimulus, whether it's chemical, sounds, vibrations, which are related to sound, sight, movement, the intake, temperature. And so all of those things, the individual bee responds at different levels. And that's one of the reasons why you can ask 5 beekeepers a question and they're going to answer it with 6 different or 20 different answers, because there are so many variables that have to be in place for the bees to react, and the bees are going to react to those variables in different ways. And so they could all be right. So if you were to ask somebody about what a bee does, and one beekeeper is thinking, here's what bees do in December, and another one thinks you're asking about bee behavior right now, that'll be completely different with completely different variables. And each individual bee is going to respond differently, and each hive will respond differently, which is where you get that saying that all beekeeping is local. We'll touch on nest organization, queen egg laying patterns, clustering, um, swarming. These are all behaviors that are responses to some external stimulus. And if you, as a beekeeper, understand those external stimulus, you can predict the bee's behavior. And as far as seasons go with inspections, seasons determine what's the important thing that you are going, the purpose for your inspection. In the spring, you're worried about buildup. You're worried in the very early spring whether they have enough resources, food. Even now, my bees are very, very hungry, and I'm going to have to feed them because they're empty and they're busting out of the seams. I actually had a swarm attempt this morning, but the queen wasn't ready to fly. And so they swarmed, but she couldn't fly with them, and they all went back into the box. So right before this, I was taking care of that. In the fall, you're going to be more concerned with building up stores. So you're going to want to see the bees storing that nectar or syrup in the storage area of the hive. So bee biology, these three numbers, you should etch these on your hive tool. If I add the word days to it, you're probably already guessing that this is going to be about the brood cycle. It equals 21 days. The great thing about this is that this number 3 goes into this number 2 times, and this number goes into this number 4 times. And so that ratio is constant in the brood nest. And once the queen is raising bees or laying eggs at her maximum rate, the brood nest will reach these ratios where you will have 4 times the sealed brood of the number of eggs that you have in that nest, and you'll have 2 times the larvae that you have of the eggs in that nest. So if you wanted to do a shorthand of determining the strength of your hive, you could look at this, how many frames of eggs you have, multiply it by 2, and that will give you a rough estimate of how much larvae you have. Multiply it by 4, you'll have the number of frames you have that are sealed brood. And you can test this by going out and actually counting your frames. And this 4 times sealed brood, this brood is going to emerge in the next 11 to 12 days. And this is your growth, and this can happen within the next 2 weeks. So when you've got 4 frames of sealed brood, your hive is going to explode. It's going to double in number in the next 2 weeks. Moving from the brood cycle, you start talking about the worker bee life cycle, and you've got 21 days as brood, and then you've got 21 days as a house bee, and then you approximately have 21 days of flying. Some people say this is 20, and some people say it's more. It has to do with how much flying they actually do. It's the amount of time that they spend flying that wears their wings out. And of course, they don't fly 24 hours a day. So this varies quite a bit. And without this, then the bees can live longer as house bees, and that's why they can get through a winter.
I can't see this.
Oh, you can't? Thought you said you could. Oh, So I've just been told that you can't see my pointer. So that's a pain in the,
Not true, Roger. I can see your pointer when you move it around.
oh, you can? Good. All right. Well, I hope everybody can. I guess maybe the phones, there's not enough bandwidth to see the changes that I'm making. So those teen years when they're in the house and they're not, they can't drive yet, there's a progression of what those bees are going to do. And as the queen lays more and more eggs per day, you have this recruitment of new bees taking over these different working stations. And that the importance of that is that until they are 12 days emerged, they're not going to be doing any nectar receiving or fanning the hive for ventilation, which would be mostly to dry the nectar. And they're not going to be ready to build wax. So people that are expecting a package to start building lots of wax really, really early, sometimes those bees are just not the right age when they first get them, because most packages are just shook from the general population, and they may not be in this range. And sometimes that's the reason why a hive, a new package might not be such a good comb building group of bees. I have a whole spiel for this. It's too long for this presentation. What I'm going to talk about is just the spring season. And the spring season is basically, I'm just going to tell you what I think. It's generally from the 1st of March to the end of June. And that's 4 months. Brood rearing can start as early as January, and so that there's not a real firm date as to when the nest will start to ramp up. But you're really not going to have much flying days. You're going to have a little bit of flying days, a couple of weeks in February, and that marks basically when the bees will start collecting pollen, and that kind of triggers brood rearing in earnest. Before that, they may be raising just enough brood to try to maintain their numbers. So if you count up the days from the 1st of March to the end of June, you come up with 122 days. And if you divide that by 21, you get 5.8 brood cycles. That's a horrible number. So I added 4 days to that, and I got my 6, and I got a whole number of 6 brood cycles. So I start worrying about my bees right here. This is when I start my season, this last week of February. I'll just tell you, I have markers for the first of each month in March, April, and May. And I want to see, because March is the first time, at the first time that you can reliably possibly look in your nest and count brood frames. Commercial guys do it much earlier, but they know what they're doing and they know how to limit the exposure. So I'm not suggesting that you look earlier than March, and I'm not suggesting you open the nest unless it's about 60 degrees. But you want about 1 to 2 frames of brood laid on the 1st of March in any, at any level, egg, larva, or pupa. On the 1st of April, you want that to be 2 to 4 frames, and by May 1st, you want that to be more than 4 frames. And if you hit those posts, those mileposts, you will be able to have a pretty darn good nectar season, honey season. And our main flow is May and June, and it really here in Kansas City, if you are close enough to a lot of black locust trees, it's going to start with black locust and then progress to the clovers. That, of course, that whole schedule can move 2 weeks ahead or 2 weeks behind, retarded by weather. So it's all relative. So you want to have a plan if you're going to open up your hive, and your inspections are to execute your plan. And so you're going to have a plan for the year, you're going to have a plan for the season, you're going to have a plan for the inspection. I picked establishing the colony because that's most what all of you first year beekeepers are in the process of trying to do. And I want you to just think about learning how the biology fits. What, when you look at your bees and you look at your nest, see those numbers that I talked about earlier and those ratios, and see if you can see that evidence of that. And then also be mindful of the behavior. You're going to see them dancing. You're going to see the bees coming in with the pollen, and maybe you're going to see them packing the pollen. Watch that stuff. And the proportion of bees that are doing different jobs in the you can get that specific if you want. You can be lost in there for hours if you really want to. But this first year, you really want to get to know all of that. You really want to get to know the behavior of the bees. You'll be a better beekeeper in the future. You want to be able to learn to estimate hive strength this year. You want to be able to have some idea of what good egg laying patterns are for queens, and the natural bee nest progression. And the last lesson that you want to try to learn this year is what information you need to gather during your inspections. I'm going to talk about purpose. I want you to always have a reason why you're going to go into the nest. If you're going to tear that nest down, there's nothing natural about you sticking your nose in the middle of a bee nest. Bees don't know anything about it. Luckily, we've bred the defensive posture of bees to where they tolerate it much better than they used to. When I was a kid, sometimes, well, a lot of the bees were not all that nice half of the time. So you want to ask yourself, what do I want or need to know before you go in? And that sets the tone, that sets what kind of inspections you're going to do. When you're in the nest, there's basically 4 reasons why you want to be in there. You want to measure the growth of the colony. You want to take a look at the brood pattern. You want to check to see if they're building comb, or if they're doing, or if they've filled the comb, and you want to know that they have adequate food supply. Types of inspections. This is arbitrary. I just created these off the top of my head in order to be able to talk specifically about the processes. So the first one I call is external or quick. The second one is what I call the partial or half inspection. And the third one would be a full-blown inspection all the way to the bottom board. I do not do full inspections except for specific reasons. And I can only think of 3 of them. One is my hive is swarming and I've got to look at every frame. The other 2 is I clean the hives and inspect everything in the springtime, and I clean them again and inspect everything in the fall before I put them, get them ready for winter. That's really the only 3 reasons why I would do a full inspection to the bottom. Almost, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to go back to external. What is an external inspection? It's basically looking at the bees at the entrance. We're going to show that in the bee yard later. You're going to see washboarding behavior. You're going to see bees fanning, moving air. You're going to see collections of pollen coming in, water coming in, propolis coming in, nectar coming in, and you're going to see bees doing their orientation flights. These all mean something to what's going on in the inside. And a really good source of studying the entrance is a book called At the Hive Entrance. It's not real technical, but they go through all of the seasons and they talk about what they see at the entrance and what that will mean on the inside. And it's a great exercise for new beekeepers to recognize that behavior at the entrance, and then when they go in to do their inspection, to verify that indeed what you thought you saw at the entrance verified with your inspection on the inside. You can get this at the Hive entrance as a PDF off the internet. Just Google the name, and there's several sources where you could download that, and it's free. Another way that you can get information outside of the nest is screen bottom boards and sticky boards. The stuff that drops to the floor is very readable and can give you a lot of information about the activity inside the hive. And it's relatively new. It's not. It's probably not all that valuable for doing your management, but it's another way to be able to take a look at a hive really quick and determine that, hey, I might want to go in and look at this hive because I can see excrement from hive beetles or excrement from wax moths accumulating on the bottom board way too much. And other great quick inspection is what we call tipping. You can tip the box back, and this is a great way to estimate the strength of your hive. It's much more accurate to look up from the bottom of the frames and count bees, count the frames that are occupied by the bees, rather than looking at that nest from above. So estimating colony strength, these are the simple numbers. If you're using medium boxes, a medium frame holds about 1/3 of a pound of bees, and that equates to about 1,050 bees. So about 1,000 bees a deep frame, about a half a pound of bees, and that's the equivalent of about 1,750 bees. These are estimate numbers. They're not, there's quite a bit of variability here by 200 or 300 bees probably. And then the accepted number for the number of bees per pound is 3,500. Of course, if your bees are bigger or if they're full of food, you know, that's going to change and it's going to be variable, but the accepted number is 3,500. So you can set up yourself a spreadsheet just like this being the frames multiplied by the number of bees per frame. You can see that in a medium box, you've got about 1.5, a little over 1.5 pounds of bees and about 32 or 5,200 bees on those frames. If you have 10 frames, which would be if you have 10 frames of mediums, you've got about 10,000 bees and about 3.3 pounds of bees. Same thing with the deeps. And you're probably asking, and then this is taking 2 boxes of 10 times this number. You're going to have about 21,000 bees. 3 boxes of mediums, you're going to have about 31,000 bees. And this 35 and 31,000 bees, that's a strong hive. How do I know this is true? This is the great frame that Eric showed at the workshops. This person counted all of these bees and color-coded them by their groups of 100. There's 900 bees on that side of that frame. Multiply that by 2, you have 1,800. That's 50 more bees than what I just said a frame holds. So the half inspection, my half or partial inspection is basically the kind of inspection I do probably 90% of the time. I collect all the information that I need from the hive: food resources, brood pattern, evidence of the queen, strength of the hive, health of the hive, diseases. I collect all that, but I only look at probably half of the frames that are involved in the brood nest. And I don't necessarily find the queen, but I look for the evidence of that queen. It could be elevated to a full inspection if you come across information that you weren't expecting. So if you find some discolored brood, or you find queen cells, you certainly, the inspection changes and the purpose would change, but it can be elevated to a full inspection. Full inspection is everything above, but you are going to look at every frame all the way down to the bottom board. How are you going to keep track of this? You're going to get a hive inspection checklist of some kind, whether you use the voice recorder on your iPhones now. You can Google hive inspection checklist, and there's like 100,000 of them out there. You can pick one that you like. Basically, you're just going to take the time to write down the numbers for each of your inspections, and you'll be surprised what will occur to you when you have several bits of data that you can track the growth of the brood nest, or you can track the number of frames that the bees are occupying. And all of that information you're going to use to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. or the next week or the next 2 weeks. A good beekeeper is always predicting what the bees are going to do next week, not what they're doing today. He's going to look at what the evidence for today, but he's going to formulate an opinion about the future. So the rest of this is just examples that you might see in a hive. Some people might think that this is laying workers. It's not. It's a queen did that because you've got queen cells. So you've got because you know that queen cells can only be created by fertilized eggs. You know that a queen laid all those queen cells, and she laid all of those brood, those drone brood. And this is all drone brood because of the size of that comb. Honeybees, when they are drawing comb outside of the nest, they're going to draw what is really called storage comb, which is where brood are raised, or a drone are raised. So we call it drone comb, but it's actually a storage comb because it's faster and less material for the bees to build that comb to store honey. But most drone eggs are laid along the periphery of the nest. You'll always notice that, well, not always, but naturally they'll be occurring on the edges of the proper brood nest, and on the inside of the brood nest, it's going to be worker cells. Everybody has trouble seeing or identifying eggs. This is what they look like. These are all laid within the last day and a half, I would say. Some of them are starting to lean. Perhaps they will eventually lay all the way down in the 3 days that they are eggs. And when they lay down on the bottom of the cell, that's when they will hatch into larvae, and the bees will start feeding them royal jelly. Another picture of eggs in black, and you notice over here on the right, there's 3 larvae that have just hatched recently, and they're flooded with royal jelly. Another really good example of both eggs and larvae with swimming lots of royal jelly. You want to see this. If you don't see this, if you see dried larvae, they're probably struggling to feed them. They need food. This is a good example of the difference between what drone brood looks like, a capped drone brood, and worker brood. So that left side is all storage cells, and the right side is all worker cells. There's a lot of things going on in this one. You notice this is all worker brood, but every so often there's a drone laid right in the middle of this. I would say that this is a queen that is possibly failing because she's not controlling where she's laying the drone egg. You see some larvae here on the edge. This is all pollen up here. You want to usually see a ring of pollen and a ring of nectar on the outside of that. You can see, I think, this shimmering liquid nectar or honey. Here's a big old fat queen. You'll notice that she's about half again as big as a worker bee. So her abdomen is almost the same size as the regular worker bee, and then you have a thorax and head tacked on to that, which equals about half the length of a worker bee. Lots of different colors. This one is this beautiful orange. This is a side view of that same queen, I think. You notice here, she's struggling to be, she's a new queen and she's just started laying. And I don't know about this frame. This frame could have been a brood that I brought from the donor hive. But these eggs and larvae there's some larvae, older larvae, and I think you can see an egg or two in here. And there's no real pattern here. So she's just now getting her legs under as far as laying eggs. This is one of her sisters. This one is doing a heck of a lot better. She's hitting every cell, and consistently she laid all of these pretty much on the same day. These came back the next day or the day after. And she's a nice leather color. I'm kind of partial to these. Expanding nest. So you see this brood on the middle. There's a ring around that. That was where pollen was stored in the first round of. So that first brood cycle, she laid in that center circle, and they placed pollen and nectar around there. When those bees hatched or emerged, the number of adult bees expanded, and they were able to cover more of the frame. And so when she laid the second time, there was still pollen and nectar in this ring, and so she laid eggs here and she laid eggs out here. And this is a little darker because it's gone through more cycles. This is lighter wax because it's only been laid perhaps one time. To raise this cycle of bees, they used up all of the pollen and nectar in that first ring, and they've got some out here on this outer ring. The third time that she fills this nest, this will all be laid at one time, and it'll all be sealed brood at the same time. The same kind of a concept, but there was no nectar or pollen ring for this inner first brood cycle. This one's a little bit scattered. I don't know that this is necessarily a failing queen, but this one would be a little bit suspect. But you can see pollen all along the bottom here and over here. So they've got plenty of pollen. Again, a big supply of pollen, a really good pattern down here. And then this is probably like a Matt Winstead frame, where he's bragging about how many bees are laid up in a frame. So here's kind of an example of what clusters look like from above. Which one of those pictures has the stronger cluster? First impressions, you would say that this one looked like there's more bees because you can see more bees, but this one actually occupies more of these seams between the frames. And we're going to go when we're about to head out to the Sorry, we were getting the camera ready for going out to the bee yard. The top frames, and then we're gonna look at a quick intersect. Oh, it looks like my network is lost. Can you guys still hear me?
Roger, we can still hear you, but we lost your video. I apologize to everybody for the inconvenience.
No, this is sure.
Well, Roger, do you feel like this is a decent time to go ahead and transition over to the? I know that you weren't finished with your presentation. Is there?
No, I was finished.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and switch the primary view over to your phone if I can figure out how to do it. Thanks to everybody for your patience.
All we have to do is she has to share her desktop.
Okay.
When she starts running her camera, then you should see her, and then everybody can, then you can make her the major screen.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
Well, I'm gonna head out there.
Oh, there she is. Okay, great. Spotlight. Hopefully everybody can see Dawn there okay. Dawn, we can see that your veil is on crooked, so that's good. There you go. And then Roger, what's your plan right now? I've got your microphone unmuted on your laptop. It looks like the microphone is not an option on your phone. Would you like me to just keep it the way that it is? I can hear you.
You should be able to do that on the phone, but we'll check that in a minute.
Okay, great. I think Don's working on that right now. Yep, there we go. I'm unmuting your Dawn on your phone.
I was gonna go ahead and go out to the bee yard and join her.
Yep, go ahead and go on out. She's on, and her microphone is now on.
Are we good?
Yep, we can hear you just fine, Dawn. And
All right.
primary, and oh, that's bright. Yeah, beautiful. You're good to go. You're online. I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself. And is Roger on his way out right now?
He's working his way over here.
Boy, folks, we sure do appreciate you for your patience. Obviously, we're stumbling around through this. We're new to this, just like many of you are, and we're just very thankful for your patience as we learn how to do this for the first time. And hopefully, here we're transitioning to Roger. He's going to demonstrate a few things for us for a hive inspection, and I think I see his shadow now. Roger, I'm going to go ahead and, oh yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
It work? Good work?
Okay.
And we can hear you okay? And so, Roger, I'm going to go ahead and hand the microphone back over to you.
Okay, we're going to use the phone microphone and speakers. So I may not be able to hear you when you ask a question. Donald might have to relay it. So the first thing we're going to look at is just the traffic on this particular hive here. We picked it because there was a lot of bees that were orienting. These are all young bees that are getting ready to be foragers. You also see a lot of bees going in that are carrying pollen. So we have an active nest in there. Just the traffic that you see here suggests that the hive is pretty strong and pretty active. I see drones coming out, so we have flying drones that There's one right there on this step right now. And we've got 3 or 4 different colors of pollen going in. We're getting an orange, which probably dandelion, or some of the other wildflowers, ornamental flowers here. And there's a lemon color going in, which I don't know. There could be several of them. So have fun watching your bees at the entrance. We're going to go to the next hive. This is a weaker hive. So in the transition, while she's walking over there, we're not going to have a very good feed, but just bear with us a moment. So this hive, we're going to do a tip to look at what the strength of the hive looks like. I use mediums, so we're going to crack it in the middle of the mediums. Earlier, we cracked it down here and looked. We had about 3 frames that were being protected like a nest.
They would like to know
While
what you're
you're
using.
cracking
as a
that
hive stand.
hive, we've got a question here. What are you using as your hive stand?
They're 2x6s with 2x4s nail or screwed to them every 2 inches or so. So underneath here, so this is the top, and you can see right now, I might overestimate how many of those frames are being used because I see so many bees over here on these frames. But we only saw bees at the bottom of these 3 frames when we tipped it down here. You go up here and you look at this, and you've got bee activity all the way across here. These are probably not part of the nest, but these 4, 5 are probably laid up with brood. So that's real quick, and you can do this even when the temperature is very questionable, 30 degrees. But you wouldn't hold it up there real long. You just crack it, look at your numbers, and move on. Commercial beekeepers use this as the first inspections that they do in the spring. Do estimates. So now we're going to go to the hive that we're going to do the full inspection. Or we're not going to do a full. We're probably going to do a partial. But we're going to try to demonstrate or show most everything. So Dawn's giving you a picture of the traffic in front. And again, you've got lots of bees that are orienting and just a ton of bees flying in and out. So this hive is really, really busy. They're busy as bees. You got pollen, you got bees coming in that are probably carrying water and maybe nectar today. I hope so, because my bees are pretty hungry. Okay. So when I open up a hive, I always use the hive top to protect me from any guard bees that might fly up. So when I open them, if this is glued down, I'll crack it, and then when I lift it, I'll keep that hive body in front of me so that they're not going to fly up and hit me in the face or on my arms. And then I'll kind of move it to the side and look down and see how busy the bees are. So if you have bees that are just covering this, a lot of times when you crack it like that, 3 or 4 of them are going to possibly fly up and try to reach you. So when I take lids off, I turn it upside down and I throw it over to the side where I'm not going to be standing. I'm always going to stand behind the hive or to the side, and I'm kind of right-handed, I guess. So I'm almost always on the right side or in the back. That's it's preferable. But you don't want to stand in the front because the bees are not used to you being in the front, and they'll run into you. And then there could be an accidental sting. I'll take care of that. So I picked this hive because I added this box just 2 weeks ago. And so this top box is going to be very similar to a new, I'll take care of that. When you get into the your nectar season and you're trying to keep and you're using a queen excluder, you're going to want to be able to create 2 stacks, one that is your supers and one that's going to be your brood bodies. And so I'll set my telescoping cover out like that, and I'll knock these off. You can knock them off like that. I usually bounce them in the front. Anything I clean off, I throw the bees out there so that they're not flying at my feet or crawling at my feet where they have a chance to crawl up my leg. So I'll take this second eel and I'll lay it out there. So now I've got 2 places where I could set boxes and not squish bees. I'm gonna go get the smoker.
I put it in there. It just needs some woof. He's getting the smoker going.
So I use cardboard, rolled up cardboard, because I have so much of it. It's free. It doesn't hold fire very long, but if you fill this all the way up with cardboard, you can get probably a half hour, 45 minutes of really good smoke. Okay, so this is a deep box. I'm going to get ready to split this off. I've let the queen, I've let the bees draw the wax out already. She's already laid eggs in this area, and now I'll just be able to take this and set it off and give it a mated queen, and I'll have my split. I had to put a medium right here on the side, and it has some eggs in it, or had some brood in it. So I want to see what they did. There's a chance that they threw wax on the bottom of it. Yeah, they did. So if you look at that, you can tell that's all drone comb, though it's really big compared to these cells here. This is all worker. That's all drone or storage. And the queen has laid eggs in it. And you can see there was quite a bit of drone, or quite a bit of brood in there, and I just didn't want to let it die, so I stuck it in here. This side, you can see on the ends. With mediums, they usually put the pollen on the ends and the nectar on the ends, and then the nest is in the middle. So that's what you're seeing here. That's pretty typical. All right. When I set this, I set the first frame off to the side. I always set it on the opposite side of the nest. If it's hot, I always set it on the side that the sun is not going to roast these bees. So, oh yeah, I pulled this frame because these the bottom bars had pulled loose, so it wouldn't go in a regular medium box, and it had all this brood. So I wanted this brood to hatch before I pulled it out of circulation. Okay. So it used to be the wood was better, but now when they glue these frames together, you really got to break them apart at those tags, because you'll split those ears off if you don't nowadays with the pine that they use. Let's see. Oh yeah, they've got this whole frame drawn out in 2 weeks. And this fir comb is basically because of the half frame next to it. You can see lots of different colored pollen and nectar on this side. And here is the way that you turn a frame. You turn it to the side, you can pinwheel it, and now you're looking at the other side. And again, this is half nectar and half pollen. That's all new. It's real liquid, so they're collecting today, which is good. So because I took that first frame out, I have room to move this frame away. When I pull this frame out, I can pull it straight out, and I'm not going to hurt the queen if she's on there. This is nectar. There's some you can blow on the bees, and that'll move them. You can also push them out of the way. So yeah, I don't know if you can see those larvae in there. So this is just the edge.
Maybe.
I don't see eggs. Oh, maybe I see some eggs. And so this is the problem with the yellow foundation. It's a lot harder to see eggs.
Let me put it so where the light is. Keep your veil on.
All right, that's the best attempt we can make there. All right, so this one, she's already laid this up, and it's almost all brood, captive brood. So you see nectar at the top. You can see the bees are drinking from the nectar. There's nectar at the bottom. Those are queen cells. And they're charged. So I need to get busy on this. I got a bee under my shirt. And she wants to sting me.
Step back from her hive.
Roger, can you explain more to, I know you're stuck there with a bee in your shirt, but can you explain more to us what you mean when you say you see some queen cells and they're charged?
Not charged.
Uh, so all along, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to this side so that you can see it. So
Slide.
you don't have to lean over. So if you can get inside those, these are what would be called queen cups. If there's an egg in there in royal jelly, then that's what I am terming a charged cup, and that turns it into a queen cell. That one is empty. No, that one's got an egg in it, actually. And these
So
are charged. One
What
of them is
does a
charged.
queen cup with a queen cell mean for our newer beekeepers?
This hive is anticipating to swarm. So I don't want it to swarm, so I'm gonna do what's called a demorie method. I'm gonna find the queen. I'm gonna put her in the bottom box, and I'm gonna move all of this. I'm gonna kill all the queen cells, and I'm gonna move all this brood up away from the queen, and give her a big area to lay more eggs. So then the older bees will be down there. And the newer bees will be the young bees, nurse bees, will still be with the brood. There's a queen cell that's already almost ready to be sealed.
Stun.
And I'm going to kill those.
Roger, he put a link on here to show the method that you're going to do.
Great.
That they can go to.
So something I would just like to chime in here, if that's okay with you, Roger, and interrupt. But
Sure.
Roger, I expect, was not anticipating to see those queen cells there, and immediately he started crushing them. But I would like all of the younger beekeepers here to know that Roger just did like 3 or 4 calculations in his head at one time, and that doesn't necessarily mean for you that when you open up a colony and as you immediately see queen cells, that the first thing that you need to do is go start crushing them all, because that might not be the best solution for what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And not to mention, there is a possibility that you've already cast a swarm and your queen's already gone, your older queen, and you start crushing queen cells and you crush the only queen that your new colonies, your remaining colony's going to have. So please note that that's not, Roger, I don't think, is necessarily trying to instruct everybody that as soon as you see queen cells, the first thing you do is crush them all.
You are right. I know that this is new, and I know that the nest is really here. And there's going to be in fact, I had a sister hive like this swarm on me this morning and do exactly what we're seeing here today in this hive. And there'll be like about 20 queen cells in these other 2 hives. This is where the nest actually is. This is new. So I knew that even number 1, I know that this hive hasn't swarmed because there's too many bees in it. And number 2, I know that the actual proper old nest where all of the really good queen cells are going to be down here. So yes, he's right. You wouldn't necessarily kill your queen cells if you didn't know you still had your queen. But I'm 99.9% pretty sure I still have a queen in this one. Okay, so I put everything back here. If you were trying to find the queen, one method that you might want to do if you have multiple boxes is the first thing to do would be to crack this and take this one off and set it aside. And so now if the queen is in this box, she's going to only be in that box. And I would look for the queen in over here rather than on top of here. Because if I'm looking at these frames while it's still on the nest, if she's up here and I pull frames, she may recognize a danger and run out of this box and into this box, which will mean I'll have to look at this box too anyway. So if you pull this immediately, if your intent is to find the queen, you have to find the queen. You would pull this box and separate it, put it over here, and then you would go through it to look for the queen. Something else that I did not cover, when you take this inner cover off, you should look for the queen before you toss it to the side. If you've got bees on any one of these, there was no bees on the telescoping cover when I took it off. There were only about, I don't know, what was there, 30 or 40 bees on here when I bounced it. But there was no queen on it because I looked and I shook them off before I set it down here. So, okay, I'm going to pop this off. So when you use your Hive tool, thinner is better. Learning how to put it in there parallel to the crack rather than tipping it. You'll break your, and you want to get that in to get the leverage and then break. Oh, that's pretty heavy. I don't know why I don't like beeps. So this is burr comb. I'm going to take it off because I don't like burr comb. Some people leave it. All right, again, I'm going to take the outer frame because this outer frame normally does not have brood on it. That frame that I pulled earlier because I knew that frame had brood on it when I put it in there, had brood on it. Well, this one also has brood on it. So I know this nest is packed. If they've got brood on the 10th or first frame, she's a laying machine.
Hence their desire to swarm.
Right. So again, you can see nectar on this outer edge. Then you've got pollen, nectar, and then the nest inside. And this is an outer frame. As you go into the middle, this grows bigger, this grows smaller. Okay, if it was windy, I would avoid laying my frame out here to catch the wind. You know, the wind blowing straight in. That would drive the heat off of this brood and expose it to cold temperatures, cooler than we'd like. But if the wind's not blowing, you don't really have a wind chill.
And Roger, what does cold temperature do for brood?
It can kill it. It can kill it, or at the very least, it will retard it, and it may take longer for it to finish development, and it can possibly interrupt their development. So their development is not perfect.
And what is considered too cool?
The brood temperature for once it's sealed, they're pretty safe. But you're still trying to keep it in the 90s, 80s at the least. And if you have wind chill in the 60s, if you've got ambient temperature in the 60s and you've got a 10-mile-an-hour wind, you're going to chill that brood if you put it like this and let that wind blow against the larva and or the open larva and the eggs. And if you damage the larva and the eggs, the workers will just pull them and eat them, and the queen will have to relay it. So this next frame is a bigger nest, mostly just pollen on these edges. There is some nectar. So you can see that the nest becomes larger and the resources become smaller. You might notice that on some of these frames, I've got written a year, and this one I've got written that it's plastic. So that it's got a plastic foundation. This next one is a new frame that I put in this year or last year when I made up these splits. And it is wax. It's all wax foundation. You can see the wire that I strung in it. And they haven't really pulled this very much. And when they do pull this, they're probably going to pull an ugly frame. You can see how it's wavy in between. Not very good. They've stolen some of the wax off of here to do other work elsewhere. And I'm not really sure why they hadn't pulled this. So you can push bees out of your way. They won't sting you. You don't want to pinch them. So there's going to be just a heck of a lot of bees emerging out of these frames. These three frames have all been primarily sealed brood. Here's a plastic foundation that was put in that same year. I didn't write down the date on it, but they've actually pulled it a little bit. It's all nectar. This hive's got way more food than that other hive did this morning. So when I have bees like this, I just put my hive tool in there and I kind of push them around until they get out of the way, and then I can pry that loose.
Roger, the question was asked, what does pulled mean?
Drawn out comb. They've drawn the comb from the foundation out to a cell. Okay. It's almost all brood, all sealed brood. There's some larvae in the middle. See that? We flip this over. Here I've got queen cells at the bottom of that. And you can see the royal jelly and probably the larvae in there. Can you?
You might be able to see it. It's kind of hard to get that close of a
You don't
shot.
want to get any more than 1.5 feet
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
You can zoom in if you stay 1.5 feet away.
I think we got it. My phone's dead, so I can't see what the picture is. It's being
All right, so there's 3 of those queen cells that are charged right there. And there's 2 other cups that are not, 3 other cups. Cup is just the beginning of a queen cell. It's not a queen cell until they put an egg in it.
Okay, so Roger, we're at an hour and a half now. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know that you're not done with your work here. Does anybody have any additional questions that they'd like to share as we get ready to start wrapping up here? Feel free to type in the group chat in the comments. We've got a lot of folks have been using that feature. I think it's been working well.
Roger, what is your queen marked in this hive? Is she a marked queen? Do you know?
I don't know for sure, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I got this one marked.
And it would probably be a green dot.
It'd be a green dot from last year, 2019.
For the newbies, the queens are marked with different colors of the paint for each year. So it signifies what color your queen is as to how old the queen is. So you might have what was it, 2018? They were orange, weren't they?
Red, I believe.
Red. Okay, reddish orange, yeah.
Okay, Roger, we've got a couple of questions come in. First question, what are your thoughts on if and when to add a second brood box?
Well, if I had been managing this for nectar, I would have added more comb, and I would have put my queen excluder at the top of my brood nest. So I want the brood nest to go all the way to this top bar on the top box. This is being managed as a single deep, these 2 mediums. So it's a little larger than a single deep, and it's got plenty of space for the queen to lay. But you want to get alternate space on the hive before these bees start to hatch or emerge. So as this thing ramped up, I needed to have my supers on probably the last week of March.
That's excellent. Thank you for that, Roger. Another person comments and says that I noticed that one of those middle frames had a lot of nectar, which isn't typical, as you said, that typically the brood tends to build up in the middle. And so they just wanted to ask, does that happen from time to time, or can you speak to that?
Well, this box right here has some frames that didn't get pulled out last year, and whether they get pulled out to this year. So you saw the one plastic was pulled out partially, but because it sat in this box all year, all winter, the bees are not as enthusiastic about pulling that in the spring as they would if you had new frames in here. So if I was doing this right, I would have had some frames ready. I'd have pulled all these that had spent the winter in here, and I'd have put new frames with new wax on those foundations, and then they would have jumped all over it. They would have filled that in. But on a new frame, usually it's a race between the queen and the worker bees, what they're going to use it for. So if the queen's got a big box and she's looking for places to lay, and the bees start pulling this frame and nectar comes in, this is where they're going to put the nectar in that new frame. And that's why you've got some of these frames in the middle of my nest that is starting to be a nectar frame.
Okay, great.
And, I don't know if that can confuse the hive into thinking that they're backfilling and they're ready to swarm, but this is a really strong hive, so that could be the case. When you start seeing nectar in amongst your comb, your brood, not around it, as I was showing you in these first 3 frames. When you start seeing it in amongst where the queen would lay her pattern, they're backfilling it. They're filling it before the queen can get back to lay an egg in it, and that's called backfilling.
And so you're saying that's a sign of that swarming may be imminent. Yeah,
That's
thank
a
you.
sign of the beekeeper being behind the bees. You want to be in front of the bees.
That's fantastic.
You want to realize that they are running out of room and they need more space to store. If there's a nectar flow turns on, and a nectar flow, as you understand, the day before yesterday, it was 30 degrees and there was no nectar coming in. And yesterday it was 60 degrees and sunshiny and nectar started coming in. And so that quick, it can turn on you. And they can start, because they've got this big bunch of bees, there's plenty of bees to do the housework, and there's plenty of bees to go out looking for food. And that's exactly what they'll do.
So we've got another question. We got a question from Tanya. I'll be getting bees at the end of this month. Will I need to be prepared to feed them when I receive them? I can just answer that for you, Tanya, real quick and say unequivocally, yes, you should be prepared to feed your bees as soon as you get them.
Yeah. The only thing that I have to say about that kind of stuff is to remind you that depending on when you get your bees, you will have a certain amount of time before there's not going to be any natural flow. And so your mission, should you decide to accept it, is to get comb drawn and not fill that comb with syrup. You want them to draw comb, and you want them to draw bee and create bees. So a mistake I see with beekeepers, new beekeepers, a lot is because we tell them you're going to have to feed, and you do need to feed a lot to get the comb to be drawn. But you can feed them too much, too fast. And what happens is they got to put it somewhere, and they will. And that's going to make them think that they don't have as much space as they might. So if I put a box on here, they might not even recognize it as utilizable, especially if it's not drawn. You can see there's a lot of space here. If they drew comb on those other frames, they'd have a heck of a lot more room to store nectar or honey, and they haven't done it. They haven't touched that one frame at all. So that's where the art comes in, and trying to figure out when a bee is going to accept a frame as something she can work, or whether they're going to ignore it and decide to swarm.
Thank you, Roger. Another real quick question from Tanya that I'm just going to answer real quick. Tanya, you're asking if to feed them sugar water or pollen patties. When you get your first bees, I would be feeding them sugar water right now, especially in Missouri and the region that we've got. I don't think you need to worry about pollen at this time of year, but that sugar water is what they're going to be drawing out that comb with. Roger, we get another question from Kel Girl asking, what are your thoughts on the benefits of a single deep brood chamber
versus your 2 sippers?
My thoughts is that it is simpler. It's easier to find the queen. It's easier to control what you're going to be doing, but you have to be fast and you have to be in front. And if you're not fast and in front, you don't know your biology and you don't see the signs of what your bees are doing like this. I hadn't been in this hive because of the cold weather, and they keep working 24/7, even if it's cold. And so even though you can't get in there and look, they're churning. Once they're turned on, their idea is to get strong enough to swarm, and they're going to fill their space to where they feel comfortable with the possibility of survival, and half of them are going to take off.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Roger. We really appreciate, and Dawn, both of you for getting in here and taking the time to get everybody kind of educated on the same page. Phil, I've unmuted your microphone. Is there anything that you want to share for the good of the group as we close?
First, I'd like to thank Roger for doing an excellent presentation. Amazing how much I've learned today, and I know some of the people even newer than me have learned a lot more. Really appreciate Roger. Very good presentation. Now, Eric, your problem is going to be, how do you top this next month?
Well, yeah. Roger, you want to speak again next month?
Well, I would say, you new beekeepers, if you've got a real perplexing question that you think that we could possibly talk about next month, that would be timely, send it in. Send it to Phil or to me or to Eric, and we'll see what we can do.
Post on Facebook too.
Boy, I
Yeah,
just
Post it
really
on
appreciate.
Facebook would be excellent. Even getting a discussion on Facebook would be great.
I really appreciate everybody's patience with us today. And I completely agree with Phil. Roger, this presentation was wonderful. I think we've fully utilized some of the benefits that we can all get from watching these presentations from home. I didn't mention this at the very beginning, but we have been recording this presentation. We're going to try to figure out a way to make this recording available to members after the fact. I think, Roger, there was some questions earlier. If we can get a copy of your presentation, your PowerPoint hosted, that would be, I think that would benefit the membership quite a bit. So we'll be coordinating those things. And once again, we just want to thank everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and close us out today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. And have a good rest of your day. Enjoy the bees. And we'll see if we can't get this going again next month.
Thank you much.
All right, thanks,
Did a
folks.
great job.
Take care.